Commander Vaxor Krill stood at the observation deck of the Nautilus Prime, his translucent fins rippling with anticipation as he gazed at the holographic projection of the blue planet before him. His large, bioluminescent eyes pulsed with a mixture of pride and excitement. The conquest of this water world would be his crowning achievement in service to the Hydrian Empire. Commander Lieutenant Mira Blackfin's voice bubbled through the water, her gill slits fluttering as she spoke. The final planetary analysis is complete. Vaxor's tentacles curled in satisfaction. The Hydrian Empire had spent centuries perfecting their aquatic warfare capabilities. Their bodies, evolved in the methane oceans of Hydrus Prime, were perfectly adapted for underwater combat. Their technology, powered by quantum fusion and protected by pressure-resistant alloys, was unmatched across 17 star systems. "Show me the details, Lieutenant," he commanded, his voice resonating through the water-filled command chamber. The hologram shifted, displaying detailed scans of Earth's oceans. Statistics and data streams floated around the projection like schools of luminous fish. Behind him, the massive windows of the command deck revealed the vast armada of the Hydrian invasion fleet. 10,000 warships stretched into the darkness of space, their biomechanical hulls gleaming under distant starlight. Surface civilization appears to be land-based primitives, Mira reported, her scales shimmering with barely concealed disdain. They've barely explored their own oceans. Water covers 71% of the surface, making it an ideal expansion target for the Empire. Vaxor swam closer to the hologram, his tail fin swishing methodically. "What about their underwater defenses?" "Laughable, Commander," she responded, pulling up images of human submarines and research vessels. "Their submersibles are primitive pressure vessels. They can barely reach their ocean floors. Most of their waters remain completely undefended." The commander's bioluminescent patterns flickered with amusement. These land dwellers were so focused on their tiny patches of dry earth that they'd left their greatest resource completely vulnerable. The Hydrian Empire would change that. "First wave deployment recommendations," he asked, already formulating invasion strategies in his mind. Lieutenant Mira gestured with her webbed hands, and the hologram zoomed in on a particular ocean region. "The Pacific Basin offers optimal conditions for our initial assault. We can establish primary bases along their underwater mountain ranges, completely hidden from surface detection." Captain Stormfin, the fleet's tactical officer, swam into the command chamber, his battle-scarred scales reflecting the hologram's blue light. "The invasion fleet is ready, Commander. 20,000 ships, including construction vessels and bio-warfare units. We can begin deployment within 3 planetary rotations." Vaxor nodded, satisfaction radiating through his phosphorescent patterns. This invasion would be different from their previous conquests. No resistance, no costly battles, just a simple occupation of an untapped resource. These humans wouldn't even know they'd lost their oceans until it was far too late. "Prepare the preliminary invasion protocol," he ordered. "I want our first wave hidden in their deepest trenches before they detect a single ship. Captain, coordinate with Lieutenant Mira on deployment vectors." "Yes, Commander," they responded in unison, their fins snapping to attention before they swam away to relay the orders. Alone at the observation deck, Vaxor allowed himself a moment of smug satisfaction. The High Council would reward him handsomely for delivering such a pristine water world to the Empire. He drafted his initial report with confident strokes: target world confirmed suitable for invasion. Minimal defenses, primitive inhabitants, abundant water resources. Victory is assured. Sending the transmission, he turned back to study the blue planet. His species had evolved from the apex predators of Hydrus Prime, and they had conquered every ocean-bearing world in their path. Earth would be no different. If only he'd looked closer at those deep-sea scans. If only he'd paid attention to the strange pressure anomalies his sensors had detected. If only he'd wondered why so many of Earth's oceans remained unexplored by its surface inhabitants. But Vaxor Krill, like so many conquerors before him, saw only what he expected to see. And as his invasion fleet prepared for deployment, the dark waters of Earth's oceans waited, hiding secrets that would soon shatter his confidence forever. The invasion began at midnight, Pacific Standard Time. Commander Vaxor Krill watched with satisfaction as his fleet of 20,000 vessels emerged from hyperspace beneath the ocean's surface. The water displacement was minimal, designed to avoid detection by the primitive human monitoring systems. "Deployment successful," Commander announced Captain Rex Wavecrest, his phosphorescent markings glowing with pride. All ships report optimal functioning in Earth's waters. The salinity levels are perfect for our systems. Vaxor's tendrils waved in approval as he observed the holographic tactical display. Their entry point, the Mariana Trench, would provide excellent cover for their initial base of operations. Human vessels couldn't even reach these depths without crumpling like eggshells. A series of bioluminescent signals rippled through the fleet, coordinating their movements with precision that would have amazed the surface dwellers. Massive carrier ships took position, their hangar bays opening to release swarms of construction drones. "Look at that pathetic excuse for a watercraft," sneered Lieutenant Mira, highlighting a human nuclear submarine passing several kilometers above their position. "They're still using mechanical propulsion. How quaint." The commander allowed himself a small ripple of amusement. "Send Scout Team Alpha to observe it." "Don't engage, we're not ready to reveal ourselves yet." Through the scout team's feed, they watched the human submarine lumber through the water like a wounded whale. Its sonar pulses were so weak they barely registered on Hydrian sensors. The crew of the Nautilus Prime shared knowing looks. These humans were even more primitive than their initial scans had suggested. Below, construction drones swarmed out from the invasion fleet's carrier vessels. They began assembling the prefabricated sections of Base Alpha, their quantum welders casting eerie blue lights through the dark water. The base's stabilization systems automatically adjusted to compensate for the crushing pressure at this depth. Commander called out Sensor Officer Pike Tideweaver, "I'm detecting some local marine life forms approaching our position. Nothing significant, just some bioluminescent creatures about the size of our personal transport pods." "Maintain standard bioshields," Vaxor ordered dismissively. "Let's focus on the base construction." The first 6 hours of the invasion proceeded flawlessly. Base Alpha took shape with mechanical precision, its curved architecture reminiscent of the grand cities back on Hydrus Prime. The quantum-powered shields easily held back the immense pressure of the deep, creating a perfect bubble of Hydrian civilization in Earth's abyss. Sir Lieutenant Mira reported, "Scout Team Beta has completed their survey of the local naval bases. The humans have something they call aircraft carriers. Massive surface vessels, completely vulnerable to underwater attack." Vaxor reviewed the scout team's footage with growing confidence. These surface-dwelling creatures were obsessed with fighting wars above the waves, leaving their underwater domain practically defenseless. Their submarines were laughably easy to avoid, their sonar networks full of blind spots. "Have the bioengineers begin seeding the surrounding waters," he commanded. "I want our defense symbiotes fully established before we move to Phase 2. The bioengineering ships released clouds of microscopic organisms into the water. These engineered life forms would grow into living weapons, protecting their underwater bases from any curious Earth creatures that might wander too close. By hour 10, Base Alpha was 40% complete. The massive structure stretched nearly 2 kilometers across the ocean floor, its quantum-powered shields easily holding back the immense pressure of the deep. Vaxor had just approved plans for the secondary defense perimeter when Captain Wavecrest reported something unusual. "Commander, we're picking up some strange vibrations in the water. They don't match any known patterns in our database." "Natural seismic activity," Vaxor suggested confidently. "This planet has an active core." "No," Sir Wavecrest insisted, his fins twitching nervously. "These are organized somehow, and they're getting stronger." Before Vaxor could respond, Lieutenant Mira interrupted. "Sir, the local marine life forms have multiplied. We're now tracking over 300 of them circling the base perimeter. And they're getting larger." Vaxor swam to the tactical display, his bioluminescent patterns briefly flickering with annoyance. The creatures were indeed growing, some now reaching sizes comparable to their smaller warships. Their bioluminescence pulsed in complex patterns that seemed almost coordinated. "Increase bio-shield power by 20%, he ordered. "And launch a probe to collect specimens. The science division will want to study these creatures' unusual growth patterns." The probe never reached its target. As it approached the swarm of glowing creatures, something massive moved in the darkness beyond the base's illumination field. Something that shouldn't exist at these depths. Something that made even Vaxor's warrior heart skip a beat. "Status report," he barked, watching the probe's feed dissolve into static. "Unknown marine life form," Sir Officer Tideweaver reported, his voice quavering slightly. Initial size estimates suggest it's larger than base Alpha. Vaxor's confident demeanor cracked for the first time since the invasion began. What kind of planet was this, and what else was hiding in these dark waters they'd so arrogantly claimed as their own? 3 days into the occupation of Earth's oceans, the first scout vessel vanished. Scout Team Gamma missed their check-in, Commander Lieutenant Mira reported, her usual confidence wavering. Last known position was near something the humans call the Challenger Deep. Commander Vaxor Krill's bioluminescent patterns dimmed with irritation. Send Scout Team Delta to investigate, and get me that vessel's final transmissions. The data stream played through the command center's holographic display. Everything appeared normal until the final 30 seconds. Then the scout ship's sensors recorded a massive pressure spike, followed by nothing. Probably equipment malfunction, Captain Wavecrest suggested, though his fin movements betrayed his uncertainty. These waters are strange. The pressure dynamics don't follow standard physics. Before Vaxor could respond, another alert flashed across the tactical display. Scout Team Delta had arrived at Gamma's last known position. Their sensor readings made no sense. Commander Officer Tideweaver called out, "Delta is reporting a localized pressure anomaly. It's like the water itself is being compressed by something." The feed from Delta showed swirling darkness, punctuated by brief flashes of bioluminescence. Not their own lights, but something else. Something that moved with deliberate purpose. "Pull them back," Vaxor ordered, but it was too late. Delta's transmission cut out with the same pressure spike that had claimed Gamma. 2 vessels lost in less than an hour. Impossible. Their ships were designed to withstand the crushing depths of gas giant oceans. No natural phenomenon could. "Multiple contacts," Lieutenant Mira shouted. "Massive life-form signatures approaching base Alpha from the southeast quadrant." The tactical display erupted with warning signals. Something was rising from the deeper trenches. Something big. The first visual contact made every Hydrian in the command center freeze in shock. In tentacles. Dozens of them, each one larger than their biggest warship. They moved through the water with terrible grace, propelled by muscle mass that defied comprehension. Behind them, a body bigger than base Alpha emerged from the darkness, its eye alone the size of a Hydrian cruiser. "By the first waters," Captain Wavecrest whispered. "That's no ordinary cephalopod." The giant squid, for that's what it had to be, seemed to study the Hydrian base with ancient intelligence. Its skin shifted colors and patterns that reminded Vaxor of their own bioluminescent communication, but far more complex. "Raise defensive shields to maximum," Vaxor commanded. "Launch defensive drones. Fire warning shots if it approaches within." The squid moved faster than anything that size had any right to move. One massive tentacle wrapped around a nearby patrol ship and squeezed. The vessel's quantum-reinforced hull, designed to withstand the pressures of deep space, crumpled like tissue paper. "All ships, battle formations," Vaxor's voice carried the edge of panic now. "Concentrate fire on its..." "Which part?" The creature's skin seemed to absorb their energy weapons. Projectiles bounced off its natural armor. And it wasn't alone. More shapes were emerging from the deep, some recognizable as giant squid, others something else entirely. "Sir, we're detecting pressure anomalies throughout the entire region," Officer Tideweaver reported, his fins quivering. "Whatever these things are, they're changing the water dynamics around them. Our sensors can't compensate." Base Alpha shuddered as something massive brushed against their outer shields. Emergency lights pulsed through the water-filled corridors. Through the command center's viewports, Vaxor watched in horror as more tentacles emerged from the darkness, these ones even larger than the first. Commander Lieutenant Mira's voice had lost all its previous arrogance. "We're getting similar reports from all forward bases. Multiple contacts, massive lifeforms. They're everywhere." The base shuddered again, harder this time. Warning signals flashed across every display. Their shields, designed to withstand the pressure of the deepest oceans, were failing against the coordinated assault of creatures they'd dismissed as simple animals. "Status report on the bio-warfare units," Vaxor demanded. "Ineffective," Sir Captain Wavecrest reported grimly. "Our engineered organisms, they're being consumed. These creatures are adapting to them, using them as food." Another patrol ship vanished into the darkness, crushed by unseen tentacles. The giant squid's eye, that terrible searching eye, turned toward the command center. In its gaze, Vaxor saw something he'd never expected to find in Earth's ocean's intelligence. Ancient, alien intelligence that made his species look like newcomers to the cosmic scene. Sir Lieutenant Mira's voice shook. "What are your orders?" Before Vaxor could respond, a new pressure wave hit the base. Alarms blared as structural integrity dropped to critical levels. Through the chaos, Officer Tideweaver's voice cut through with terrifying clarity. "Commander, there's something else coming up from below." Something bigger. Vaxor's bioluminescent patterns went dark with primal fear as he realized the terrible truth. They hadn't invaded a defenseless water world. They'd invaded a fortress, guarded by creatures that evolution had spent millions of years perfecting. And they were about to meet its greatest defenders. Base Alpha's emergency generators hummed as Commander Vaxor Krill assessed the damage from the giant squid's attack. 3 ships lost, 2 sections of the base compromised, and an entire squadron of drones simply gone. But worse than the losses was the growing realization that they'd completely misunderstood this world's oceans. Commander Captain Wavecrest's voice carried an edge of desperation. Long-range sensors are detecting massive thermal readings from the seafloor nearby. The tactical display shifted, revealing a network of thermal vents that made their quantum reactors look like children's toys. Superheated water erupted from the planet's crust, creating conditions that should have been impossible for life to survive. Except life was thriving there. "What in the 7 seas?" Lieutenant Mira whispered, as the camera drones transmitted their first clear images. Entire ecosystems clustered around the vents, creatures that defied their biological understanding. Massive tube worms swayed in the currents, each one larger than a Hydrian transport. Swarms of blind white crabs scuttled across fields of mineral formations that looked like alien cities. Sir Officer Tideweaver's fins flared in alarm. Something's moving among the vents. Multiple somethings. They're using the thermal currents for propulsion. The creatures that emerged from the scalding waters made the giant squid look tame. Their bodies were armored with what appeared to be natural metal deposits, evolution turning the vent minerals into living weapons. They moved through water hot enough to melt their ships' hulls, completely unaffected. "All units, maintain distance from thermal zones," Vaxor ordered, but the creatures weren't staying near the vents. They surged toward the Hydrian fleet, riding the thermal currents like living torpedoes. "Incoming object," Lieutenant Mira shouted. "It's wait, that's not natural. That's manufactured." Through the chaos of battle, a small submersible vehicle appeared. Human-made, but far more advanced than anything they'd detected before. Its hull was designed to channel the thermal currents, using Earth's own geological forces for power. "We're receiving a transmission," Officer Tideweaver reported, surprise evident in his bioluminescent patterns. "It's from the human vessel." The message that came through was crude by Hydrian standards, but its meaning was clear. "This is deep-sea research vessel Nautilus Actual. You have entered a restricted ecological preserve. These waters are protected." Protected? These humans, these surface-dwelling primitives, claim to protect these monsters. Before Vaxor could process this revelation, the seafloor began to move. What they'd thought was bare rock shifted, revealing itself as the armored hide of something ancient. Something that had been sleeping until their invasion disturbed its rest. "Multiple bioreadings," Captain Wavecrest's voice cracked. "They're everywhere. The entire seafloor is alive." Creatures rose from their eons-long slumber, creatures that Earth scientists had never even discovered. They made the giant squids look like minnows. Their bodies evolved to survive pressures that would crush a planet's core. The human research vessel transmitted again. "Be advised. You have disturbed a deep-sea ecosystem that has remained unchanged for millions of years. These species are the ultimate survivors, adapted to conditions that would destroy any surface life. We strongly recommend immediate withdrawal." Vaxor watched in horror as one of the ancient beings opened eyes the size of small moons. Its consciousness pressed against their minds, vast and alien, an intelligence born in Earth's oceans when their own ancestors were still swimming in shallow pools. Sir Lieutenant Mira's voice trembled. "We're detecting similar awakening across all Earth's oceans. The Mariana Trench, the Philippine Deep, the Puerto Rico Trench, they're all inhabited." The tactical display told a story that shattered every assumption they'd made about this world. The oceans weren't empty. They were an interconnected web of ecosystems, each more complex and dangerous than the last. The thermal vents weren't just geological features. They were the power plants driving a civilization older than their entire species. Commander Officer Tideweaver reported, his voice barely a whisper. Analysis of the human research vessel suggests they've known about these creatures. They've been studying them. Their primitive technology, their limited exploration, it wasn't ignorance. It was respect. Another blast of pressure rocked the base as something truly massive rose from the thermal vents. Its body was a living marvel of biological engineering, adapted to pressures that could turn steel to dust. Bioluminescent patterns rippled across its surface in mathematical sequences that put their most advanced computers to shame. Through the command center's viewports, Vaxor watched as more human research vessels emerged from concealed observation posts. They moved through the chaos with practiced ease, their crews seemingly unafraid of the ancient horrors surrounding them. They're not defending their oceans from U.S. Captain Wavecrest realized aloud. They're protecting us from what lives in their oceans. The human vessels transmitted one final message: you have 30 minutes to begin evacuation procedures. After that, we cannot guarantee your safety. These beings have guarded Earth's oceans since before mammals walked on land. They do not welcome invaders. As if to emphasize this point, one of the thermal vent creatures casually reached out and crushed a Hydrian heavy cruiser. The ship's quantum shields, their proudest technological achievement, might as well have been soap bubbles against the creature's strength. Sir Lieutenant Mira's voice was barely audible. "What are your orders?" Vaxor stared at the tactical display, watching as more ancient beings rose from Earth's abyssal plains. Everything they'd assumed about this world had been wrong. These oceans weren't an empty resource waiting to be claimed. They were the domain of beings so perfectly adapted to their environment that they made the Hydrian Empire look like tourists paddling in a shallow pool. And the humans weren't primitive at all. They were wise enough to know their place in this underwater hierarchy, wise enough to study these creatures without disturbing them, wise enough to warn others away. A massive tentacle, large enough to wrap around their entire fleet, slowly emerged from the darkness beyond their sensors' range. The ancient being it belonged to was still waking up, still rising from depths that their technology couldn't even reach. Commander Vaxor Krill, conqueror of 17 water worlds, made the only decision he could. The attack came from all directions at once. The ancient creatures had only been toying with them before. Now they attacked with purpose. Multiple hull breaches in sections 3 through 7. Lieutenant Mira's voice cut through the chaos of Base Alpha's command center. Bioshields failing across the entire network. Commander Vaxor Krill watched in horror as his mighty invasion fleet was torn apart by Earth's marine defenders. Giant squids wrapped their tentacles around warships, crushing them like toys. Swarms of creatures from the thermal vents melted through quantum-hardened hulls with their natural acid secretions. "Sir, human vessels approaching from the north," Officer Tideweaver reported. "Their entire Pacific fleet is moving into position." The humans had been waiting, Vaxor realized. Their submarines and surface ships hadn't been ignorant of the invasion. They'd been herding the Hydrian fleet into this killing ground. A massive shape passed over Base Alpha, blocking out what little light reached these depths. The ancient being from the thermal vents had fully awakened, its body a nightmare of evolutionary perfection. Natural weapons that made their most advanced technology look like toys sprouted from armored flesh that had evolved to survive pressures that would implode a planet's core. Commander Captain Wavecrest's fins trembled as he reported, "Our quantum drives are failing. Something in these waters is interfering with the particle stabilization." The water itself seemed to turn against them. Currents that defied physics tore through their formation, scattering ships like leaves in a storm. Pressure waves that shouldn't have been possible at these depths crushed entire squadrons into twisted metal. "Status report on the emergency quantum portal," Vaxor demanded. "Non-functional," Sir Lieutenant Mira replied, her voice cracking. "These waters, the molecular structure is all wrong. Our systems can't compensate." Through the command center's viewports, Vaxor watched as more horrors emerged from the deep. Creatures that Earth scientists hadn't even discovered yet, beings that had evolved in complete darkness, attacked with devastating precision. They moved through the water with impossible grace, their bodies perfectly adapted to conditions that were slowly destroying Hydrian technology. "Sir," Look Officer Tideweaver pointed to the tactical display. Human submarines had taken position around their fleet, but they weren't attacking. Instead, they were dropping some kind of devices into the water. The devices activated, sending pulses through the ocean that made the ancient creatures even more aggressive. The humans hadn't just been studying these beings, they'd learned to communicate with them. All hands. Abandoned Vaxor's order was cut short as something massive slammed into Base Alpha's main support structure. Warning lights flashed through the water-filled corridors as compartment after compartment began to collapse. "Our technology can't handle these conditions," Captain Wavecrest shouted over the blaring alarms. "The pressure variances, the thermal anomalies, the electromagnetic interference from these creatures, nothing is working as it should." The pride of the Hydrian Empire, their supposedly invincible technology, was failing spectacularly. Their quantum drives couldn't function in water that seemed to ignore the laws of physics. Their bioshields were useless against creatures that had evolved natural weapons far more powerful than anything they'd engineered. A final, massive pressure wave hit Base Alpha. The structure groaned, its reinforced walls buckling under forces that their engineers had never imagined possible. Through the chaos, Vaxor caught one last glimpse of the tactical display before it shorted out. Hundreds of red dots representing his ships were vanishing, swallowed by the darkness of Earth's oceans. The human vessels maintained their distance, watching as the ancient guardians of their world's waters demolished the invasion force with terrifying efficiency. Commander Vaxor Krill, conqueror of 17 water worlds, finally understood. They hadn't invaded a primitive planet's empty oceans. They'd walked into a trap millions of years in the making, where evolution had created defenders more powerful than any technological civilization could hope to match. Commander Vaxor Krill gave the order he never thought he'd give in his 300-cycle career. "All units, full retreat. Abandon base. Get to the surface by any means necessary." The remains of the Hydrian invasion fleet scattered, desperately trying to reach shallower waters where their quantum drives might function. Base Alpha creaked and shuddered around them, its structure failing as ancient creatures systematically tore it apart. Only 30% of the fleet still responding, Lieutenant Mira reported, her voice hollow. "We're losing contact with more ships every second." Through the command center's cracking viewports, Vaxor watched his mighty armada disintegrate. Some ships were crushed by tentacles large enough to encircle cities. Others simply vanished into the darkness, dragged down by creatures that human science hadn't even classified yet. Sir Captain Wavecrest called out. "The human vessels they're opening a corridor to the surface. They're letting us retreat." On the failing tactical display, Vaxor saw it was true. The human submarines had arranged themselves in a pattern, using their mysterious devices to guide the ancient beings away from a narrow path toward the surface. "Send the emergency signal," Vaxor ordered. "All surviving ships, follow that corridor. Maximum speed." The Nautilus Prime shuddered as its engines strained against the strange physics of Earth's oceans. Behind them, something massive rose from the thermal vents, its body blocking out all light from above. Its roar transmitted through the water with enough force to shatter their remaining sensors. Commander Officer Tideweaver's fins quivered. Incoming transmission from the humans. The message was brief run. "Don't look back. Never return." As if punctuating this warning, a creature larger than anything they'd yet encountered emerged from the depths. Its body was a perfect fusion of biology and natural armor, evolved over millions of years to become the ultimate ocean predator. It moved through the water with impossible grace, ignoring pressures that would crush their strongest ships into atomic dust. "Final status report," Vaxor commanded, watching his empire's greatest invasion force crumble. 15% of fleet remaining operational, Lieutenant Mira responded. "Base Alpha completely lost. All secondary bases destroyed. No contact with deep-sea units." The surface seemed impossibly far away. Each kilometer of ascent was paid for in lost ships and shattered technology. The creatures pursuing them had evolved to move seamlessly between depths that would kill any surface species. They weren't bound by the same laws of physics that had seemed so immutable to Hydrian science. As the Nautilus Prime finally broke through into the sunlit waters near the surface, Vaxor activated the quantum transmitter one last time. His message to the Hydrian High Council would be his most important communication. Emergency protocol override. Priority 1 message to High Command. Earth invasion failed catastrophically. Do not attempt further incursion. These oceans are not empty. They are not defenseless. They are home to beings that evolution has spent millions of years perfecting. The humans are not primitive. They are wise enough to know their place in the hierarchy of their world's waters. Any future attempts to claim these oceans will meet the same fate we did. The creatures here do not forgive. They do not negotiate. They are the perfect defenders of their realm. And they have demonstrated that our greatest technologies are nothing compared to the weapons nature has given them. This is Commander Vaxor Krill's final report. Stay away from Earth's oceans. What lurks in their depths should be left alone. As the surviving ships limped through their quantum portals, fleeing Earth's solar system, Vaxor took one last look at the blue planet through the external cameras. The surface looked so peaceful, so inviting. But he knew better now. Under those calm waters lurked horrors that would haunt his dreams for the rest of his life. The oceans belonged to them. They always had. And they always would.